G'day everyone, this is Einke here. Welcome to Investor Journeys, where we chat with everyday Aussies and seasoned investors about their property journeys, the wins, the stuff ups, and everything in between. Whether they've got one property or a whole portfolio, we dive into how they did it, what they've learned, and what their journey's been like so far. No fluff, just real stories from real people. So let's get stuck in. G'day everyone, welcome to another episode of the IJ podcast. We've got another guest here. He's actually a client of ours, but also someone very close to me. It's one of my cousins. So he's joining us today just to share his story. He'll tell you all about himself, currently in Sydney, but I'll let him share the story. So welcome, Vivian. Thanks for joining on.
Good to be here, mate. It's great to be joining the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man looking after some wealthy clients and all that. So I really appreciate you joining and sharing your story. I know you quite well. We've known each other since we were little kids, ever since I came to your house. But do you want to tell us a little bit about your backstory, mate, where you've grown up and a little bit about the family as well?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I'm in Sydney, like you said. I'm been here for close to coming up to 15 years now. Time sometimes just go by fast, doesn't it? Yeah, but no. Before that, grew up in Sri Lanka. So born and raised in Sri Lanka. Did my schooling there, and was in Sri Lanka till I finished high school. And then, sort of soon after high school, I'd say about 6 months after high school, I moved to Australia and Sydney. I've been in Sydney ever since, really. So yeah, came here to go to uni, and didn't kind of look back beyond from that point onwards, I'd say. So been in Sydney for close to 15 years now.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you've got a couple of siblings and you're the older one, aren't you?
That's right. Siblings have followed me, so I was the first one to venture out, and I suppose they saw the good times I was having, and then decided, okay, so they've come after me. Yeah, so siblings are here, brothers in Melbourne, sister here in Sydney. So it's nice to have some family, parents too, back in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I remember when I was a small youngin and growing up in New Zealand, and I came over to Sri Lanka, and I think I met you guys for the first time. And I obviously met your family, and obviously a lovely family, and we hung out playing computer games and all that kind of thing. The three of you, your brother and your sister and yourself, in the house in Sri Lanka. But look, obviously I know a little about the family, but would you say, getting into sort of the investment mindset and everything like that, do you think you had some sort of influence from the family with that respect, or do you think you sort of gone through that on your own? Was that ever spoken about, across the dinner table there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thinking back, I don't think it was ever sort of explicitly or directly sort of mentioned, but it was sort of implied almost indirectly, right? So, Sri Lankan sort of background, Southeast Asia, or South Asian, sorry, I should say, my sort of cultural background, right? So with that background, it was always the concept of doing well, I suppose, is what was spoken about, and that was primarily from I suppose, the academic point of view, in terms of studying. It was also, well, you got to study, you got to, get through exams, school, university, that kind of thing. So this concept of sort of doing well was emphasized. And but you sort of observe, right? You look at how your parents go through things, and my dad's, done a couple of business ventures over the years, and his friends, and he was always very proud of his mates that had done well, and he would say so and so's, a doctor or someone's successful in business. It was the concept of doing well. So I knew I always wanted to sort of, I had ambitions and wanted to do things for myself. But that was sort of, I'd say, the indirect influence. And then you move across, you go to uni, and then it's just about, trying to figure out life after that, right? You get your first full-time job, and from there off. But I'd say that was indirect influence. And after that, it was sort of, I studied finance at uni, so always had a connection to sort of numbers and finance, and wanted to work in that space. But it did take a little while to sort of, look inside and get your own personal finances, and try to map things out, right, and say you've got to have a plan here and move forward. So it wasn't straight out of uni that I was sort of switched on and ready to go. It was just more took its time, but it was always ambitious, I'd say. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I think the way things are done in Sri Lanka, from a business perspective, and the way things are done in Australia are quite different. But look, shout out to your mum and dad. I know them very well. So such lovely people. I even remember playing badminton with your dad and some of his mates, and that's always lovely to see them whenever I go and visit over there.
I didn't. I was going to say, I still had the great memories of you coming back and playing those computer games. That must have been sometime in the 90s. But obviously I wasn't playing badminton then, so I didn't know you had a hit out in badminton with my dad. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think it might have been another trip where I played badminton with him, but yeah, the computer games were certainly. I still remember the room that we were in, and you and Sachin especially, were asking me to play this car racing game, and your sister was wanting to do something else, but it was anyway, it was really good times. Whenever I came, and it was just so relaxing and such a laid back type of atmosphere over there in Sri Lanka. So whoever hasn't been to Sri Lanka that are listening, make sure you go over there. It's such an amazing place. But yeah, like I said, things are done very differently in Australia. You're the first one to move out of the home and come to Australia, so it was probably eyes wide open for you. So when you first arrived in Australia, what was that like for you? Like, did you, I assume, did you stay with family or did you start renting straight away? What was the situation?
Yeah, and so I didn't stay with family. I mean, apart from the first week, I sort of stayed just on uni, right on Yard Uni. I have uni accommodation, so that was sort of the start there, and it was very exciting, but also sort of nerve-wracking at the same time, right? So the excitement was driven by having this freedom. You come out, having strict parents, whatever you finish schooling, oh, you've got you're free to go. So it's so that was exciting, and I had a few mates, not many, but a few mates that had already sort of moved a little bit ahead of me. But it was, yeah, certainly very exciting, but it was also nerve-wracking that you just don't have the same level of support, right? So you don't have those support structures around you. So I had some close family friends, some distant family. But from that perspective, it at times it can feel that, especially those initial years, can feel a little bit lonely when you go out on your own. But I suppose that was part of the journey, right? And you made mates along the way, and no, it's been good. It's still there.
Yeah, things start to get easier once you start to meet a lot of people and start to network and all that kind of thing. So you finished uni and what was your first job like?
Yeah, finished uni, mate. I was just trying to find my feet after that. During uni, you have different sort of aspirations. You go to careers fairs and all of that, but things sometimes don't pan out that way. So, my first job was actually to do with mortgages, but sort of back end processing. So yeah, we was working for a company that did the back end processing for Ranch. It's part of Westpac Group, and that was didn't know anything about mortgages until I sort of got that job. And you see apart you don't do the sales or the actual loan originations, but you do everything on the back end from processing to discharges and retention of customers and all that sort of thing. So it was interesting. So I was there for about a good, I'd say, 3 years. Yeah, sort of different roles, but in different sort of departments. Because even within the processing, there was discharges, there was variations. Looking at credit files and all that. Spent a lot of time on the back end, and that was a real eye opener in terms of that. But it still felt like a more a admin sort of processing job, and so I was still trying to find my way to the world of finance, and that's how I got my first sort of role in financial advice as an associate advisor. I was also doing a bit of study post uni in financial planning or financial advice, so a little bit sort of going backwards. That I did a degree, a bachelor's, a master's, but then went back into a sort of diploma in financial planning, and
Mm.
then again in an advanced diploma, and that sort of got me my first role in financial advice. So that was sort of my second job, and yeah, been in financial advice since then for the last sort of 7 years, yeah, 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, not too surprising. I mean, I think there's a few people out there who do their degree, then they go get the job, which is probably not really related to what they did, and somehow they fall into it, and then they decided to go down that path, and they've got to go back and get more expert, qualifications in that field. So probably not too surprising, but I'm guessing that property was the furthest from your mind at that point in time. Just getting out of the uni and working at the start.
Yeah, getting out of uni when you had your first job, it's exciting in that, it's your first full-time paycheck, right? And you're young, I was in my early to mid 20s, and when you get that paycheck coming in from versus being a, call it a broke uni student, and the life's a little bit different. So you got a bit of cash flow, and you want to do things, and it wasn't hard to get a credit card. I must say, it wasn't always great with my finances. You get your first job, your credit card, and you go, yep, you're spending all your money pretty much. But life is good, and you're not making big money in your first job, but it's sort of money in money or kind of concept, yeah. And
Yeah.
after school, but going into financial advice was a little bit of an eye opener. But you're right, no, wasn't thinking about property straight away. I think that's also kind of related to just property prices in general in Australia, right? And that inherent sort of let's say fear, but saving for that first deposit, right, can seem pretty daunting. And so property wasn't my first thought. It was just enjoying life. But I think there was a sort of a flipping point where I kind of went, like, I've got to start thinking about, getting into property, getting into your first home. That was sort of the start of it. I'd say probably in my mid 20s, with that about, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're obviously grown up in Sydney, so you would have seen firsthand prices are probably, scared most people as coming out of uni, and I can appreciate what it was like getting your first job, going from probably $2 beers at the liquor store to cocktails at the establishment or something like that. But I'm sure you had a good time. But yeah, look, the property game would have been very different, I suppose. Once you first come out of uni. So, tell me about once you get started getting closer to your first purchase and look, I know your first property. Do you want to tell us a little bit about leading into that and what your mindset was like then? And when was that?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So once that sort of flipping point came around, I in terms of thinking of getting into property was about, how do I save this deposit, right? And 20% wasn't going to be attainable in my head. So I sort of had a 10% figure and, trying to look at what was affordable. So then again, looking at, Sydney and being the most sort of expensive market here in Australia, houses again seemed like it was out of the equation on a single income. So it was really, more than sort of what targeting a certain type of property, was more just trying to save towards, say a 10% deposit. And that was sort of the path, right? And it was chipping away it slowly, again, very sort of slow progress it felt at the time, right? It took me years to save that first 10%. But you're working towards it, you're saving towards it. And then and as I got into financial advice, I was trying to see what sort of incentives or initiatives there were for first home buyers, and how I could sort of capitalize on those different initiatives to try and, help me get into the market. I was all about, it's so hard. What help can I get? What are state and federal governments doing to sort of help someone get into their first home? And it then became also about trying to sort of maximize some of those entitlements. Things like your stamp duty concessions. That was probably the main one. And then I also did take advantage of the first home super same scheme, which wasn't there in prior years, but the government introduced it at some point in time. And so just looking at those different sort of initiatives, which then sort of pushed me towards that, own occupied primary residence, right? Because with some of those initiatives, you can't buy an investment property, or it's not eligible if you're an investor. So that was kind of the journey there. And in terms of actually getting ahead of the line, across the line and making that first purchase, I'm still sort of slow burning in terms of saving for the deposit. So then I kind of shifted to saying, okay, I need a bit more time. Can I sort of go and lock in a price, right? And, because prices seem to be moving as well, the long intake to save towards a deposit. So can I go and lock in a price and still, have some time to continue saving? And that's where it sort of drove me towards an off the plan purchase, because you don't, settle on the property until construction's complete. And so that's when I went and looked at, different developers who were doing sort of off the plan purchases, and landed on one in solid income area at what I thought was a reasonable price point at that time. And then did get a little bit lucky in that, COVID struck, and, things, pretty crazy, and it sort of a frightening time during COVID. But, yeah, we went in lockdown, and then, construction seemed to come to a halt, and the economy, just seemed to slow down, right? So there was then more government initiatives coming in, and there was this home, if I'm saying it correctly, there was the whole builder grant at that time for building of new dwellings, of major renovations, but off the plan purchases also qualify. So there's a little bit of a handout from the government if you signed a contract within a very specific window. And I was like, okay, wasn't quite ready yet, but I was like, I've got to, there's a bit of incentive here. I'm just going to go and sign a contract, and let's see what happens at the end of it, right? So
Yeah. So when did your apartment get built in the end?
yeah, so that was a good question. I think it was a lot, let's say not later, but quite a bit later than it was initially advertised. So I signed, the contract early part of 2021.
Oh, okay.
And at that time, so that was COVID, and then the construction was slated to finish in mid to late 2022. But with all the lockdowns that happened, and there's difficulty getting people with this tradies, and construction supplies prices went through the roof. So the construction eventually finished and sold in October 2023. So almost a good 12 to 18 months behind schedule.
Yeah.
Which is good in some regards, in that I could keep saving. But it was almost where we went through that rate cycle, right? We went through a cutting cycle, went to the bottom, and then by the time I settled, rates that inflation picked up and rates are sort of coming back up again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's good you weren't subject to the sunset clause, but there's a lot of builders who secure. So the way the development works is they would need a certain number of pre-sales, right, before the development starts to be able to fund the development, and then they would, sell the rest or whatever it else through the development. But there was a lot of builders through that time who decided to use sort of dodgy tactics, and through COVID, because of I suppose construction costs went out the window during that time, and obviously forthcoming after that with the wars and whatnot, but at that time, there's a lot of people who got stung through builders because they were enforcing escalations and costs and all that kind of thing. And it's fortunate that you weren't subject to much of that. It sounds like your price pretty much stayed the same through that whole process, which it didn't happen all the time. So it's that's probably one really fortunate thing that you don't have to go through that stress, and all that kind of thing, because you could have been coming back with a negative negative amount of equity out of that purchase. So yeah, that's good. So you settled that in 2022, and then you've obviously stayed in there for a little while, and you're now a homeowner, if you will, in Lidcombe. Are you able to share some numbers on that, or?
Yeah, so settled actually into 23 other Barancas. Yeah, so the thing that was attractive to me was the price point, right? I was looking at different apartments, and even apartments kind of seemed out of reach, right, in terms of the price at the time. And I didn't want to buy a one-bedroom apartment because I was thinking a bit more longer term and thinking if I rented it out, what the view will look like and things like that. Also, just from a family perspective, I was single at the time, still single, but I was thinking, um, if I was to meet someone, family, one bedder, might not be the best longer term fit. So, so it was 2 bedrooms because 3 then pushes you out in terms of the price range. So I thought 2 was a sweet spot, and looking around in terms of the 2 bedroom units. And this developer hadn't done a few developments in the suburb I was living in at the time. And they seemed to be of reasonable or good quality in roads, but roads as a suburb is too out of the price range for me. But then that's when they announced this new development in Lidcombe. And so, seemed at a reasonable price. They had their 2 bedroom units, I think, starting at 650 to 750 to 800 in that sort of price range. And I thought $650,000 for a 2 bedroom unit, doesn't sound all that too bad for Sydney, like, suburb that's sort of, 30 to 40 minutes from CBD by train. And so the price point was attractive. So, so I bought one of their 2 bedroom units at 650 on the price range.
Okay. Yep.
Yep, and sort of settled on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and sort of roughly what's that one valued at, sort of at the moment?
Yeah, look, so that one was valued by the bank at 720 recently. So it's a little bit of upside in that time. Suppose units are not doing what some land and houses are doing, but it has still gone up in that time frame. And it has worked out well especially in terms of lifestyle. There's more a lifestyle purchase, I'd say, than a financial purchase.
Yeah, I mean,
You have on site for renting, right, and have it in place.
yeah, that's right. I mean, obviously, you would have had to rent in that perspective, and I'm guessing at this point in life, you sort of want to be on your own and do things your own way and all that kind of thing. So I can appreciate that. Are the body corp costs, do they sting? Like, are they high, or are they manageable?
Look, I'd say for me personally, where I'm at now, it's manageable. You get other residents complaining, right? What if all of that? Say someone always complaining. I'd say they're manageable for this level, but a little bit on the high side for what we've got in terms of communal facilities. We don't have there's no gym or pool in the building, for example.
Yeah, so you got lifts. Yep.
Yeah, just to list your common car parks, the standard sort of communal facilities. But from my perspective, it is a little bit on the high side. But I'm interpreting that as them being prudent with their finances, so that I don't get slapped with something bigger down the track. But obviously it's got to be managed on an ongoing basis.
Do you know what that? Do you know what roughly it is?
Yeah, it's about 1250 a quarter.
Okay. Yep. So about $5,000 for the year.
$5,000, $5,000. It's about
yeah. So less than I thought, to be honest. But yeah, that's probably because you don't have all the added benefits or amenities in the development. I'm sure there's others that have to pay a lot more for that kind of thing. So all right, so you've you've got a bit of equity out of that over the last few years, and you're still living there. And then what were you thinking after that purchase? I suppose a couple of years on.
Yeah, so got into the place on kind of that was good, and then working in financial advice, you're always thinking about the next step, right? Because you do this for your clients, and you think at some point you got to look at your own personal finances and see where to from there, and also just the power of time, compound interest, and also leverage, right? Leverage is a leak. the sort of grow your wealth. And so that what got me thinking beyond that point. And I didn't think I had a lot of borrowing capacity after that first purchase, right? Single income, wasn't very confident of the borrowing capacity, but started to crunch some numbers, reached out to my mortgage broker to see what was possible. And I think that was around probably the same time, I got talking to you as well. You start your property journey, and it was very exciting. And obviously the relationships that we have, just having someone trusted, that you can reach out to, so those things come sort of together. And then the broker was able to crunch some numbers, and there was no sort of lending or borrowing capacity from the big banks, but there was a little bit of spare capacity going to a sort of a non-bank lender.
Yeah.
And there was I think seeing some of those numbers, plus talking to you and tapping into your sort of know-how, sort of was the catalyst, I suppose, for that second purchase.
Yeah, I think that was an important point you raised though about the banks. I mean, you get the odd few now, not many anymore, that are going to still banks for their brokering. And it's important to note that the brokers out there who ultimately is free of charge to the buyer has access to so many more models and rates. And whilst the rates on those maybe tier 2, tier 3 lenders are slightly higher potentially, the added benefit of getting into a property versus not, and the upside on that is huge, versus the sort of negligible almost rates difference in rates between the two. So that's an important point you raised, that you were able to get that through sort of a lower tier lender. So you've had a chat with myself, and we had quite a robust chat about a couple of locations. I do remember, because I do remember the budget that you had. I was thinking to myself, because we were still investing in Perth at the time, but not so much, because the market had moved quite a bit. Although we still saw movement, obviously. So I was thinking, maybe we should go to another location in Queensland for your budget. Do you want to sort of do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, I do, man. I do. And the budget was somewhat, I wouldn't say restricted, but somewhat limiting in terms of the options, we could consider, right? So it was, sort of that, $500,000 mark or there.
Yeah, 400K.
Yeah. So I remember speaking to you. It took us something to move quite fast when we got talking, right? But you don't beat around the bush, got your data, and it was straight on to what's next and making those next steps sort of happen. And I remember speaking quite extensively about Townsville. I think that was sort of the preferred location. First, you're investing in Townsville for some of your other clients, and I remember having a robust discussion about Townsville, the good things that he saw in that region. I had some, I know, took your comments on board, but I had some concerns with sort of making a regional purchase, and also the flood risk in Townsville, and just a few concerns on that front. And that's where you came with more input, right, as to alternatives as well. Anyway, from there,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, everyone's got valid sort of concerns with regional places, and we've got to be able to back up while we decide, we still go into that area, and it's done very well for our clients. But at the end of the day, I did say, if we're able to get into a metro market like Perth back there, if we're able to see an opportunity, we'd jump on it. Because we still saw some really good value, and this is still, this is a good year and a half ago. So the opportunity came up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I remember, after having that Townsville conversation, we kind of went back a little bit to the drawing board, and he said, we can still look at a metro city like Perth. And I was more keen on a metro location, right? The East Coast seemed to be out of the 40-meter range. I've seen in Melbourne, Brisbane was sort of priced out, so that's where I think Perth came to the conversation. Again, I know little about the the demographics and the suburbs in Perth, right? So certainly couldn't have done it without your guidance. I think once we sort of landed on Perth, you had a few suburbs that you were looking at, and what I remember was I was at work one day, and you messaged me and said, "Hey mate, there's a property that we should look at. Can you look at this now?" Because I recall at the time, Perth properties weren't sort of staying on the market for very long, so you said we've got to move quickly. So then I just went into a meeting room at work and looked at your sort of the details that you'd sent across, and we got moving from there on. Really.
This particular suburb was actually, the days on market was about 10, and just to give people an idea, quite a tight market is 30 and under. So this is one of the hottest markets in the whole of Australia, to be honest. So I said, look, mate, I think this is a great potential. However, it does come with a big condition. And do you want to give us an idea of what that condition was?
Yeah, I think you're referring to the tenants.
Tenants, yeah.
Yeah. There's long-term tenants in the property, and paying sort of below market sort of yield. It was also just that tenancy period, right? It was quite
It
unusual.
was a long lease, yeah, and
Yeah.
and so they had signed on to a long lease, which, there was little room we can basically do in terms of rent increases over the next couple of years, and it was under rented as well. Obviously there was a clause in there which we had to get it reviewed quite thoroughly in the lease that there was a certain percentage that goes up every 6 months or so. So we were able to put some numbers together in terms of what it should be in 6 months and 12 months and 18 months. But still, it would still be under rented. The way Perth, the market was moving, it was going to be under rented. However, we still believe the opportunity on this 4x2 property, in this particular suburb at that price point, and just to be fair, we were able to get that price point because of that lease. So it's not like that came with a burden. That we wouldn't have secured that property if we weren't negotiable on the lease. So we had to understand it. I suppose you had to understand your numbers and your cash flow and make sure that you were comfortable. Otherwise, we would have just simply moved on, and potentially had to pay a high price somewhere else. But at the end of the day, we secured a fantastic property, and you've been able to get a very good property in a good suburb, good location, and I think that's done very well for you over the last sort of year and a half, hasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly has, and that's where you're not taking your guidance, right? Because naturally, I had the concerns, looking at the cash run, you're going, the yield is, considerably under to what the market rates are, but you would sort of back in me saying that it's a great price, great suburb. That's sort of a compromise, and yeah, it was fine. But understanding the compromises, and then still making that informed decision, but just heavily relying on your sort of insights, because I wouldn't know what for fair value is,
Yeah.
but that's the right suburb, so that, that's where the value that comes in, right?
Yeah,
terms of
we
that.
we were to give you some comparables, but at the end of the day, look, one of the things that we do with our clients is make sure that the cash flow is sustainable for them. If they're not able to hold the property for the 6, 12 months, whatever, that's just a waste of time for everyone. And the last thing we want to do is put undue stress on our clients and make sure that they have to sell the property in a short term. So we go through all of that and quite rigorously, in terms of making sure, that's sustainable. So, we thought it was on the tight end for you, but you were able to manage it, and you've been able to manage it obviously over the last year and a half. And when does that lease come off? That's next year, doesn't it? Late next year?
Late next year, that's right. I think November 26th. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you'll find that unless there's some law that comes in that you can't increase it by a certain percentage, which there isn't, you just can put it up to market value. I think you're going to find you're going to get a pretty big bump in that property. All right. So you've got that property. I think we secured it for about that 500K mark. What's it worth today? Do you know?
Yeah, I think the most recent valuation, I haven't been validated from a bank, so sort of relying on the dark money, something like that. But I think it's at that 650 mark, I'd say.
Yeah, around that 650 mark. So, you're talking about 150K in a very short space of time by signing some piece of paper. Now, obviously, we're well aware that it's under market rent as well. So that's just a short-term pain that we've talked about. But at the end of the day, you've been able to secure some great equity from that property in that short term, which definitely, I'm sure, balances out the under market rent that it's producing, and no doubt it will do well, well over time as well. So, very, very happy that we're able to get that property for you in that budget range at that point in time. So fast forward, a year and a half, and sort of we're here today. So do you want to give us or the listeners some thoughts of yours in terms of what you're planning next?
Yeah, and constantly thinking about how to optimize your finances, and where we can invest in, right? Just to keep investing, the power of investing, sort of get towards financial independence, I suppose, which is the ultimate goal, right? So yeah, looking at my options again, when you're talking leverage with one income, there are limitations in place. And so, my preference is just to go down that path of leveraging to invest. Property is a a serious consideration in that mix. So just reviewing my numbers, looking at what the options are this time. Rate cuts, do help when you're wanting to invest, but equally, as I understand it, it brings in more buyers into the market and there's more competition. So that's the offset on the other side. So yeah, just in that early stages of crunching numbers and seeing, what's out there, right? What's the right opportunity? Is there something that I can make work, or do I just have to hold off and be a little bit more patient until rates go down further or income improves?
Yeah.
Yeah, just in the sort of very initial stages there.
The long and short of it is that you don't have any further borrowing capacity based on your current situation, because you've obviously got your personal principal place at the moment, with debt on it. You've got your investment in Perth, so there's very limited borrowing capacity moving forward, and that's understandable based on a single bloke and living in Sydney, where the expenses does get taken into account when working out the capacity. So yeah, I think the next steps for you would be really deciding, do you want to sell your principal place, which you're currently considering, and then getting into further investments depending on your borrowing capacity, or do you want to just hold on to what you've got at the moment, and sort of keep your aces up the sleeves, and so to speak, for the future. Bearing in mind that, yes, prices do move over time. So, that there's sort of conversations that you're going to have. And I dare say there'll be a lot of people out there very similar to you, especially in Sydney, who are on single incomes and or even double incomes, and they've bought a PPR with $2 million of debt, or $1.5 million of debt. Just because you're on dual income doesn't mean that you've got a better situation. It all depends on your current debt levels. So yeah, those are sort of numbers that we're going to have to talk about in crunch. And the broker will be one of the most important parts of that. From my perspective, it's always good to get into property, and whilst you can. So it's really understanding from the broker, and obviously understanding your personal situation, whether you're willing to go and rent again, whether that's a feasible option. And so selling your PPR and buying another property, it's a better opportunities to potentially do that and buy properties into a trust. That's another conversation for another day, but obviously we can chat about it, which where trust has its pros and cons, but ultimately does preserve some borrowing capacity if it's done right. So yeah, there's a lot of conversations to have. But at the end of the day, you're not you don't have to buy a property in the next month. You can take the time and have those discussions. So yeah, we'll do that off this podcast, and we can sort of see where you go next.
Absolutely, man. And this is the value of having a team behind you, right? Because, like I said, I work in financial advising and crunch my own numbers, but having a team behind you with its broker, the buyer's agent, putting everyone together, and just run scenarios past everyone, right? And getting a second opinion, getting somebody else to crunch numbers that you've already crunched, and just getting sometimes a different viewpoint can really open up things. And this is where I know the value of getting advice is immense. You pay for the services, right? And it's not cheap, but you get your value, right? And that's where you've got a good buyer's agent in your corner, you've got a good broker, you can start to make things happen, right? So it's hugely underrated. I think having that sounding board and people you can trust and bounce your scenarios off and numbers off, yeah, that's where you start to make real progress, right? Rather than if you were to do it alone, it'd be a lot harder, a lot slower. And it's going back to the purchase, right? Like it's another stay across the country. That would be to Perth myself, so you couldn't have done it without the connections you had on the ground there in terms of, the solicitors, the agents, the building and pest contact, all of those things. So yeah, there's this huge amount of value in getting the right advice, good advice.
Yeah, absolutely. It also just mitigates the risk as well, doing it right, doing it seamlessly, less stress, so I appreciate that. I completely agree. And if I had people in my corner when I first started, no doubt I would have done better. But at that point in time, there was a very different dynamic in the property industry. So no, look, the fact that, like I said, you're a single bloke in Sydney and looking to purchase their even potentially third property, that's amazing. So you should be very proud of yourself. I'm sure, being in the industry does help, but at the same time, I do know a lot of potentially financial advisors and people in the finance industry, whether they be, advisors, brokers, buyers agents who don't have the number of properties that they would advise people to do, so, that's great that you actually walking the walk as well. So yeah, congrats, mate. I'm very excited about your journey moving forward, and hopefully we'll get you on and get in the future and understand where your journey's ended up at later on. So yeah, thanks for coming on, Viv. Really appreciate it, and really glad you're able to share your journey.
No, it's been really good. Thanks, I look forward to working with you. It's always enjoyable working with you. It's just not numbers and everything. I like I said, we played great personal relationship. It's an enjoyable experience, and I look forward to working with you, mate. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. More coffees and I'm sure a few drinks to come in the future, mate. We're not far away from each other, so we'll catch up soon.
Yep, maybe a game or two watch the All Blacks and the Wallabies too.
Absolutely. That's I think that goes without saying. So yep, no, that's great. Thanks, Viv. Happy to have you on. So thanks everyone for joining in today. I hope you enjoyed Vivian's story, and no doubt we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, guys. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the chat, feel free to drop us a rating on Spotify or wherever you listen. It helps us reach more listeners to help them with their journey. Catch you in the next episode.